What if China's hardest mountains to conquer are not the famous tourist peaks, but the hidden ones that make you fight for every single step? Far from the crowds, there are gorges, cliffs, and high ridges where rock, water, and thin air push your legs, your lungs, and your courage to their limit. In Bakwansha, a small boat carries you into a narrowing canyon, dark walls closing in on both sides, cold spray hitting your face as the river forces you forward between sheer slabs of stone. On Jianglong Mountain, your hands lock around cold iron rungs drilled straight into the cliff, the drop tugging at your heels while you climb toward a clean slice of sky cut right through the center of the mountain. On Mount Sigunyang, the path turns steep and slow, each step digging into loose rock and thin snow, your breath loud in your ears as the ridge rises ahead and the air grows sharper with every foot you gain. If one gorge or one ladder can push you this close to your edge, how will you see yourself after facing an entire range built to test your nerve? And how many unseen summits are still waiting out there, far from the guidebooks, for the few people willing to keep climbing when everything in their body says stop? Come with us into China's hidden mountains, places where every bend in the river, every rung in the rock, and every final step is a choice to go higher, and where the real view is not just the landscape below you, but the version of yourself that reaches the top. Bakwansha. Bakwansha is the kind of name that most guidebooks skip over, a quiet label on the Taihang Mountains in northern China that hides how far the land suddenly drops away. Behind that small word is a flooded canyon where steep cliffs rise nearly 1,000 feet above a narrow strip of still, green water, turning what was once a tight mountain river into a long, enclosed corridor of rock and light. There is no simple road along its floor, so the only real way to explore this gorge is to sit in a low, open boat and let it carry you along a series of gentle S-curves that cut deeper and deeper into the mountain. At the start, the bends are wide, and the sky sits comfortably above you. But with each new turn, the walls draw closer, the water darkens, and you feel the boat tracing a careful line between height and depth that you cannot fully see. Your guide explains that over thousands of years, a modest mountain stream carved this path through layers of sandstone and harder rock, and that the modern reservoir simply filled the space it had already created, leaving a hidden lake that stretches for about half a mile. In some places, the water beneath the hull drops to more than 100 feet, and knowing that simple fact makes every slow, S-shaped curve feel less like a casual ride and more like a measured commitment to keep going forward. Bakwansha does not test you with ropes or ladders, but it does ask whether you are comfortable when your only way ahead is a narrow boat, high rock on both sides, and a winding channel that offers no quick exit. What stays in mind afterward is not only the image of green water and red cliffs, but the calm, steady pride of having followed that hidden line all the way into the heart of the gorge and back out again. Jianglang Mountain does not rise as a single summit, but as three tall stone ridges standing side by side in western Zhejiang, like narrow blades of red rock lifted straight out of the hills. From a distance, they look almost flat, more like a sheer wall than a mountain, and it is hard to imagine that a walkable crack is hidden between them until you come close enough to see where the rock splits. In that split, often called a one line of sky, the cliffs climb to nearly 1,000 feet, while the gap between them shrinks to little more than 10 feet, turning open landscape into a high, vertical corridor of shadow and light. The route inside is not a simple path. Narrow ledges hug the face of the pillar, and at the steeper sections, cold iron rungs drilled straight into the cliff wait for each hand and foot. Climbers wear harnesses clipped to fixed steel cables, moving one careful step at a time, while the empty air beside them makes it clear that this is no ordinary scenic walkway. As you edge deeper into the crevice, the noise of the outside world falls away, your shoulders almost brushing the rock, and the only sounds left are metal against metal and your own breathing. Reaching the innermost point is less about strength than about calm, about trusting each rung, each narrow foothold, and accepting that the only way forward is to stay close to the stone. When you finally emerge back into full daylight and look up at the three pillars from below, Jianglang Mountain no longer feels like a distant postcard view, but a place you have entered, tested yourself against, and quietly conquered from the inside. Mount Sigunyang. What if the most demanding mountain in western Sichuan is not the one you see from the valley, but the snow-covered summit that almost always hides behind its own clouds? Mount Sigunyang, the tallest of four sister peaks, rises to over 20,000 feet, high enough to hold snow most of the year and to pull storms across its shoulders in a single afternoon. Its long ridges were lifted and shaped over countless winters, carved by wind and ice into steep white faces and narrow saddles that local herders have watched from below for generations without ever needing to stand on top. Trails that begin as gentle walks through quiet village fields soon reach open meadows, then tilt upward into long snow ramps as they leave the last trees and level ground behind. The air grows thinner and colder with each turn. Breaths come shorter, legs slow down, and even strong hikers start measuring progress in small blocks of steps instead of miles. Higher up, roped climbers move across hard, wind-packed snow and frozen gullies, kicking each foothold carefully, knowing that a careless slip here can slide a person a long way before they can stop. Temperatures can drop well below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and clear blue mornings sometimes turn into blowing cloud and sharp ice crystals in less than an hour, closing the upper route with no room for argument. On the rare days when the weather holds and the final ridge opens, the summit is a simple crest of rock and snow, surrounded by deep white basins and distant ranges that look small and far away beneath your boots. In a country full of easy viewpoints and busy scenic platforms, Mount Sigunyang keeps this high, snow-hidden world for the few who accept its altitude, its cold, and the long, quiet work of climbing all the way into it. Mount Mian. For more than 1,000 years, Mount Mian in Shanxi has been less a single summit than a long stone spine of temples and stairways, quietly gathering the stories of China's spiritual life along its cliffs. The ridge runs for several miles above the valley, its layered rock cut into natural ledges where wooden halls and tiled roofs sit anchored directly into the face of the mountain. Many of these temples date back to early imperial dynasties, rebuilt and expanded across different eras, so that one complex can hold carvings from one century, inscriptions from another, and restoration marks from our own time. Stairways carved straight into the stone link terrace to terrace in long, narrow flights, not designed for comfort, but for direct access from the valley floor to shrines placed high on the cliff. Along these routes, stone tablets with worn characters, weathered guardian statues, and old incense burners suggest how officials, scholars, monks, and villagers once climbed here to ask for guidance, protection, or simply a quiet place to reflect. It is easy to imagine past pilgrims arriving after long journeys, standing on these same platforms in heavy robes, catching their breath while they decided what to write, offer, or promise beneath the eaves. Seen this way, Mount Mian is not only a scenic ridge with cliffside architecture, but a living archive of how many generations have chosen to place their prayers, worries, and hopes directly into the side of a mountain. The Yandang Mountains in Zhejiang look, at first glance, like a simple line of cliffs and rounded peaks above rice fields and small towns. But their real character only appears when you step in close. Here, ancient volcanic rock has been carved into sheer walls, narrow gullies, and tall stone pillars, so that some ridges fall almost straight for hundreds of feet, while thin waterfalls drop in silver threads from ledges high above the valley floor. Temples and small shrines have settled into this landscape over more than 1,000 years, tucked into caves, perched on terraces, and set against bare rock. so that lanterns, roof lines, and chant sometimes share the same space as mist, pine, and cliff. Paths wind along the sides of the mountains rather than over gentle tops, turning simple walks into balcony-like routes where each turn opens a different angle on towers of stone, hanging forests, and sudden drops. In certain places, steep stairways and cut ledges carry you toward viewpoints where evening light catches the faces of the peaks and makes them glow softly above the darker valleys below. For travelers who are willing to leave the busy lowlands and follow these narrow ways into the rock, the Yandang Mountains feel less like a single sightseeing stop and more like a quiet, layered world where geology, history, and living tradition all share the same cliffs. Baishi Mountain in Hebei rises abruptly from farmland on the northern edge of the Taihang Range. Its upper ridge built from bright white marble that gives the whole massif its name, White Stone. Over millions of years, uplift and erosion have turned this marble cap into a compact peak forest of more than 100 separate summits, narrow fins and blocky towers lining the crest like a long row of standing stones. On one section of the ridge, two isolated pillars known as the Two Heroes stones stand slightly apart from the main wall, a natural pair that local stories associate with ancient frontier generals watching over the passes. Nearby, a huge slab called the Hanging Rock juts out from a sheer face and seems to hang above the slope below at an impossible angle, held in place only by the weight and balance of the surrounding stone. To protect and interpret this geology, the mountain has been designated both a National Geopark and a World Geological Park, with marked paths leading to viewpoints where the marble layers can be seen folding, cracking, and dropping toward the valleys in clear bands. A short glass skywalk fixed directly into one of the cliffs at over 6,000 feet then gives visitors a straight vertical view into those same folds, turning Baishi from a distant white ridge on the horizon into a concentrated lesson in height, stone, and time. Sanqing Mountain in Jiangxi rises from the Huayu Range as a tight cluster of granite peaks and ridges, often wrapped in drifting cloud. Its three main summits are linked in Taoist belief to the three pure ones, so the mountain is treated as a natural shrine rather than just a scenic ridge. For many centuries, monks and hermits have used ledges and small terraces as places for meditation, quiet practice, and copying sacred texts far from the valleys below. Instead of one large complex at the base, temples, pavilions, and simple stone platforms are tucked onto narrow shelves along the cliffs, turning the ridgeline into a chain of small, sacred stops. Granite pillars and thin rock walls frame these sites, so that roof lines, incense burners, and old stairways appear suddenly between pines and then disappear again into the mist. Modern cableways and marked trails now bring visitors to viewpoints that once required long climbs, but shrines still receive incense in daily chants at dawn and dusk. Because of this layering, Sanqing Mountain stands out as a place where sharp stone peaks, cloud, and steady Taoist practice have grown together into one continuous spiritual landscape. Mount Tai in Shandong rises on the northern edge of the city of Tai'an, at the eastern side of China's old heartland, where the North China Plain begins to lift into rock. For more than 3,000 years, it has been regarded as the foremost of the country's 5 great sacred mountains, a place where power, memory, and the idea of facing the east naturally come together. Early chronicles describe emperors traveling here to perform great state sacrifices, treating the summit as a high altar to heaven and the lower slopes as a matching altar to earth. Because it stands at the frontier between plain and high ground, Mount Tai gradually became a symbol of beginnings, linked in classical thought with sunrise, new rains, and the hope that a ruler or a family could start a chapter on the right footing. The main pilgrimage route climbs by roughly 6,000 stone steps from the base to the upper temples, a distance that turns the act of going up into a clear, visible form of effort that anyone can understand. Along this route, important gates, terraces, and palace-style compounds were added in different dynasties, so a single ascent also doubles as a quiet tour through changing ideas of how authority and worship should look. In modern times, Mount Tai has been recognized as both a cultural and natural World Heritage Site, a formal acknowledgement that the same slopes carry religious history, political history, and a long record of human use of the landscape. For visitors today, the combination of old state rituals, long-used steps, and a measurable climb from city level to summit still makes Mount Tai feel less like a casual outing and more like taking part in a tradition that has been counted, recorded, and repeated for many centuries. Mount Songshan in Henan stands just south of the Yellow River near Dengfeng, a compact block of peaks that tradition has long treated as the central sacred mountain of China. Geographically, it is formed by 2 main massifs, Taishi and Shaoxi, together carrying around 72 named summits and reaching heights of roughly 1,500 meters above sea level. Early cosmology called this area the center of heaven and earth, seeing the mountain as a fixed point where the pattern of the sky and the order of the empire could symbolically meet. Over many dynasties, emperors and officials traveled here for important ceremonies, leaving stone inscriptions and records that tie major political moments directly to this single range. Around its lower slopes, three pillars of Chinese thought built major institutions: a leading Taoist complex at Zhongyue Temple, the Confucian Songyang Academy, and the Buddhist Shaolin Monastery, famous for Chan practice in martial arts. Together with ancient observatories and ritual platforms, these sites now form a ring of monuments around the foot of Songshan, showing how different traditions chose the same mountain as their reference point. For visitors and researchers alike, Mount Songshan reads less as one isolated summit and more as a dense, physical record where geography, imperial authority, religion, and science have all converged on the same piece of high ground. Mount Tianmen in Hunan rises just south of Zhangjiajie as a single prominent massif, its name Heaven's Gate, coming from the huge natural arch cut through its limestone wall. A rockfall in the year 483 opened that opening more than 400 feet high, and later dynasties treated it as an auspicious sign linking the mountain to the sky and the imperial order. Because of its position at the edge of the Wuling Range, Tianmen has long marked a symbolic frontier between the lowlands and the deeper, more broken highlands of western Hunan. Historic records describe local officials and envoys visiting the mountain to perform ceremonies under the arch and to leave inscriptions that tied regional authority to this striking piece of terrain. Modern engineering has added a cableway of over 4 miles from Zhangjiajie and a steep, winding mountain road with dozens of sharp turns, turning the ascent itself into a measurable transition from city level to high karst. Near the upper station, walkways and viewpoints now face directly toward the Heaven's Gate opening, allowing visitors to see how the arch frames the sky and the valleys beyond in a single vertical corridor. Taken together, the height of the arch, the long rise from the town below, and the long history of ritual and attention make Mount Tianmen stand out as both a geographic landmark and a long-used symbol of passage between the human world and a higher realm. Zhangjiajie in Hunan is a broad sandstone and quartz massif where thousands of thin rock pillars rise out of misty valleys, forming a vertical landscape that looks more like a fantasy painting than a normal mountain range. The core of the area, known as Wuling Yuan Scenic and Historic Interest Area, covers roughly 100 square miles and has been protected as a World Heritage Site for its rare mix of geology, forest, and long human use. Geologists explain that these pillars were carved over millions of years as wind, water, and repeated freeze-thaw cycles cut into thick layers of sandstone, leaving only the hardest spines of rock standing. For local communities, the maze of peaks and ravines has long been tied to stories of spirits, hermits, and wandering scholars. And traditional names for the pillars often reflect animals, legendary figures, or scenery from classical tales. Modern infrastructure has added cableways, elevators, and viewing platforms, allowing visitors to move quickly from river level to the high edges of the plateau and look out across entire forests of isolated towers. Seen as a whole, Zhangjiajie is less a single mountain and more a dense stone labyrinth, where geology, local story, and global media have all combined to turn one corner of Hunan into an instantly recognizable symbol of China's wild interior. Gaoyiling in southern Hunan is a compact red rock basin on the edge of Quanzhou, where a small range of Danxia hills wraps around still water and low farmland. The ridges are made of red sandstone and conglomerate laid down roughly 200 million years ago, then tilted and carved by rivers until only long, smooth backs of rock and narrow inlets were left. From above, the main ridge bends in a broad arc around green lakes like the spine of a resting dragon, with steep flanks that fall sharply to the water and flatter shoulders that serve as natural viewing platforms. Along one cliff, engineers have fixed a hanging plank road that runs for about a quarter of a mile, clinging to the rock wall at around 800 feet above the lower valleys. This gallery in the air links features with names like Dragon's Backbone and One Line Sky, places where the slopes pinch into a thin corridor or stretch out as a tilted stone roof above the lakes. Because the slopes are mostly bare rock rather than loose soil, paths tend to follow the natural lines of the ridges, rising gradually along long, open backs before dropping suddenly toward a pool or a narrow pass. Below, chains of small reservoirs and ponds collect in hollows at the base of the cliffs, turning clear runoff into curves of bright green water set directly against the red faces of the hills. The whole site sits just beyond larger, more famous destinations like Dongjiang Lake and Feiqian Mountain, which means Gaoyiling often feels like a quieter side chapter to a bigger southern Hunan journey. For travelers who want to understand how China's red bed landscapes work in practice, Gaoyiling offers everything in one contained place. Layered rock, shaped by time, turned into a natural amphitheater where water, stone, and careful paths all point the eye along the same sweeping curves. Mount Lushan in Jiangxi stands above the city of Zhejiang as an oval block of peaks between the Yangtze River and Poyang Lake, a high stone island rising from the lowlands of central China. The main massif stretches for about 15 miles in length and 6 miles in width, with its highest point, Dahanyang Peak, reaching a little under 4,800 feet above sea level. For much of the year, the upper slopes sit in cooler air and frequent cloud, creating the sea of mist and shifting horizons that help turn Lushan into a classic summer retreat. On one slope, the 4th century Donglin Temple became the cradle of Pure Land Buddhism, while nearby the White Deer Grotto Academy grew into a major Confucian teaching center under Song Dynasty scholars. In the early 20th century, villas, churches, and schools built by Chinese leaders and foreign communities turned the high town of Kuling into a seasonal capital and meeting place for political and cultural elites. The wider area is now protected as Lushan National Park, recognized in the 1990s as China's first World Cultural Landscape, and later added to the network of global geoparks for its clear record of mountain building and glacial shaping. Taken together, the modest height, dense cluster of bikes, religious foundations, old academies, and 20th century villas make Mount Lushan feel less like a single summit and more like a layered cultural landscape written directly onto the rock. Mount Huashan in Shanxi stands on the southern edge of the Wei River Plain, long regarded as the western sacred peak in the traditional group of 5 great mountains. Its massif rises to about 7,070 feet at the south peak and is organized around 5 main granite summits connected by narrow ridges and steep gullies. For more than 2,000 years, pilgrims, officials, and hermits have climbed these slopes, treating the mountain as both a Taoist stronghold and a place to test personal resolve. Early ascent routes were cut directly into the rock as chains of handholds, stone steps, and carved footholds that cling to walls, which drop almost straight to the valleys below. Sections with names like 1,000-foot precipice and 100-foot gorge reflect not exact measurements, but the feeling of moving along paths that can be as steep as the side of a high-rise building. In recent decades, metal railings, reinforced stairways, and a cable car have been added to reduce risk. Yet the basic layout of sharp ridges and exposed crossings still demands attention from anyone attempting the full circuit. Scattered across the peaks are old Taoist temples, simple halls, and stone tablets, many bearing inscriptions that link particular deities, historical figures, or legendary recluses to specific terraces and viewpoints. Modern visitors often combine devotional stops with the challenge of reaching several summits in a single day, turning the climb into a blend of light pilgrimage, strenuous exercise, and high-altitude sightseeing. Because of this mix of height, steep natural architecture, long religious use, and carefully managed danger, Mount Huashan stands out as a mountain where geography and belief have shaped a demanding route that still feels both historic and very immediate. Yuntai Mountain in Henan sits on the southern edge of the Taihang Range, where a block of highland rock drops suddenly into a network of deep, narrow valleys. The area is protected as a national park and global geopark, recognized for its combination of steep canyon walls, red rock formations, clear streams, and layered cliffs that show how this part of central China was built over time. Elevations climb from low river flats to peaks a little over 4,000 feet, so within a short distance, visitors move from sheltered gorge floors to high viewpoints looking out across the plains. A series of gorges, including the well-known Redstone Gorge, cut straight into the plateau and expose thick beds of sandstone and other sedimentary rock that have been carved by water over millions of years. Several waterfalls drop from the plateau into these canyons, with the main Yuntai waterfall often cited as one of the highest single-drop falls in northern China, especially impressive during the wet season when mountain streams are strongest. Small temples, old village paths, and stone steps near canyon mouths reflect how local communities have long used the passes and watercourses here as routes between farms, markets, and higher grazing land. Modern walkways, viewing platforms, and clearly marked trails have been added along major ravines and cliff edges, balancing access with safety rules and seasonal closures when conditions become unstable. Taken together, the gorges, waterfalls, exposed rock layers, and long record of human use make Yuntai Mountain feel less like a single peak and more like a compact textbook of central China's canyon landscapes, written into real stone and water. Tiantai Mountain in Zhejiang forms a compact highland above Tiantai County, a block of forested granite where the main peak, Huading, rises to about 3,600 feet and looks out over the coast of eastern China. For well over 1,000 years, it has been known as the home ground of Tiantai Buddhism, a major Mahayana school built around the Lotus Sutra, with Guoqing Temple at its heart, serving as a training center for monks from China, Japan, and Korea. From this single mountain, the Japanese Tendai tradition and the Korean Chontae school both trace their roots. So what looks like an ordinary Chinese county peak on the map quietly sits at the source of several strands of East Asian Buddhist thought. The landscape itself is built from rounded granite domes, narrow ridges, and deep-cut valleys, with cliffs, streams, and waterfalls folded together in a way that lets temples and hermitages sit directly against bare rock. Within an area of a little over 40 square miles, visitors can move from dense forest to open high meadows and then into steep ravines, seeing how the same stone has been carved into both dramatic scenery and usable paths over time. Local culture adds another layer, from the gentle he-he ideal of harmony often associated with the region, to popular tales of the eccentric monk Gong, whose story is tied to caves and shrines on the slopes. Because of this mix of rugged terrain, long religious history, exported philosophy, and living folklore, Tiantai Mountain is often treated not just as a scenic hill in Zhejiang, but as a small, concentrated crossroads of Chinese landscape and belief. Mount Pan in Henan rises on the border between lowland fields and higher hills, forming a compact block of ridges and cliffs that mark the transition into central China's interior highlands. The main crest runs for several miles, with a chain of rounded summits and steep rock faces that drop into narrow valleys where small rivers have been cutting through the mountain for a very long time. Over many centuries, local roads and caravan paths have used these valleys as natural corridors, so way stations, small temples, and old stone markers gradually gathered at key passes and river crossings. The slopes carry a mix of forest, scrub, and terraced fields, showing how farmers slowly push their cultivation higher while leaving the steepest cliffs and ridges to remain as wild background. Rock layers exposed on the higher flanks record several stages of uplift and erosion, giving geologists a clear cross-section of how this part of Henan shifted and tilted over millions of years. In recent decades, parts of the range have been organized into a scenic area, with mapped routes that link natural overlooks, old temple sites, and a handful of surviving pavilions from earlier restoration periods. Simple statistics often used in local guides, such as a main peak rising to a little over 3,000 feet and a core scenic belt a few miles across, help visitors grasp how compact the mountain really is. Legends collected from nearby villages speak of wandering scholars, retired officials, and hermits choosing Mount Pan as a quiet place to read, write, or withdraw from court life, adding a layer of remembered personalities to the bare topography. Modern visitors tend to combine historical interest with light hiking, using marked paths to move between viewpoints where they can look out over patchwork farmland on one side and deeper hills on the other. Because of this blend of strategic position, long local use, readable rock structure, and modest but clear height, Mount Pan is often treated less as a single dramatic summit and more as a concise example of how landscape, livelihood, and history fold together in inland Henan. Mount Ma in Sichuan rises at the western edge of the Sichuan Basin, a high, elongated massif that lifts sharply from farmland and river valleys into cool, cloud-covered peaks. Its highest point, the Golden Summit, stands at a little over 10,000 feet, so a single slope carries visitors from humid, lowland forest through belts of evergreen trees and up to bare rock and alpine shrubs near the top. For Chinese Buddhism, it is one of the four great sacred mountains, traditionally linked to the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra, so geography and religious meaning have been tied together here for many centuries. Textual records and archaeological finds show that organized Buddhist activity on Ma began more than 2,000 years ago, and over time a chain of temples and monasteries grew along different elevation bands rather than in one single cluster. At the Golden Summit, stone terraces and temple buildings stand only a short distance from steep drops on several sides, giving clear views across a rolling sea of clouds that often hides the basin below. On clear days just after storms, visitors sometimes see the so-called Buddha's light, a circular rainbow or halo projected onto the mist, a phenomenon that has long been given spiritual readings, even though physics now explains the optics behind it. The mountain's height and humidity also support rich plant and animal life, and Ma is known to biologists as a biodiversity hotspot, where several forest types and many endemic species meet on one slope. Because of this combination of steep relief, layered vegetation zones, long monastic history, and distinctive optical effects, Mount Ma has been recognized as both a natural and cultural World Heritage Site. For modern travelers, it offers not only a measured climb from basin to summit, but also a compact view of how landscape, belief, and scientific interest can all focus on a single mountain. Mount Wutai in Shanxi Province stands at the headwaters of the Qingshui River as a high plateau of 5 flat-topped peaks, which is why its name means five-terrace mountain. The highest of these terraces, the North Peak, rises to just over 10,000 feet, making it the tallest summit in northern China and matching its older description as a clear, cold height. Within Chinese Buddhism, it is ranked first among the 4 great sacred mountains and is regarded as the earthly seat of the Bodhisattva Manjushri. So pilgrims have been coming here for well over 1,000 years to seek wisdom and leave offerings. Around the Central Valley and across the surrounding slopes, more than 50 monasteries and temples form a dense religious landscape, from rare early wooden halls of the Tang era to larger compounds rebuilt under later dynasties. The 5 main peaks ring this settled core like the petals of a stone lotus, with roads and paths linking outer hermitages, stupas, and viewpoints into a loose circle around the main monasteries. In 2009, Mount Wutai was added to the World Heritage List as a cultural landscape, recognizing not only its height and unusual five-terrace form, but also the long, continuous shaping of the mountain by doctrine, architecture, and pilgrimage. Mount Juhua in Anhui rises above the outskirts of Qizhou as a compact block of ridges and rounded peaks, set between river valleys and low farmland in eastern China. In earlier dynasties, it was known by other names, but Tang Dynasty poetry celebrating its 9 glories helped fix the title Juhua, and over time the mountain shifted from a local landmark into a widely recognized sacred site. From the 8th century onward, it became closely associated with the bodhisattva Ksitigarbha, after a Silla prince-turned-monk is said to have practiced here for many decades and left an incorrupt body that devotees treated as a living relic. The core area is organized in vertical bands, from foothill villages and trailheads up to the high Tiantai Ridge, with Juhua Street in the middle acting as a kind of mountain town where pilgrims, resident clergy, and visitors all cross paths. In the early 21st century, a 99-meter bronze statue of Ksitigarbha was raised at the foot of the range, turning the bodhisattva's role here into something that can be seen from far beyond the immediate valleys. Taken together, the long line of legends, the concentration of monasteries, and the mix of older stone halls with modern devotional works make Mount Juhua feel less like a single summit and more like one of China's major Buddhist worlds compressed into one mountain. Mount Huangshan in southern Anhui is a compact granite range whose name, Yellow Mountain, comes from old legends that the Yellow Emperor refined elixirs and ascended to heaven on these slopes. Its skyline is built from more than 70 named peaks, with the highest, Lotus Peak, rising to about 6,100 feet and giving the range a dense, upright profile rather than one single dominant summit. Geologists trace Huangshan's history back to ancient seabeds lifted and cooled into hard granite, then carved by ice and running water into cliffs, gullies, and freestanding towers that now define the landscape. Over the centuries, stone steps, paths, and simple pavilions were added along the ridges so that farmers could move between viewpoints, hot springs, and high passes while also leaving inscriptions and place names that tied stories to specific rocks and peaks. Today, a core zone of roughly 60 square miles is managed as a protected scenic area, with rules that balance cableways, lodging, and visitor numbers against the need to preserve the mountain's rock forms, forests, and wildlife. As a result, Mount Huangshan is known both as a UNESCO World Cultural and Natural Heritage Site and as one of the classic model mountains of China, where geography, history, and artistic tradition all point back to the same cluster of granite summits.